On this podcast, we talk to leaders, teachers, artists, and scientists from around the globe to explore how to bring more justice and mercy in our own world. Today, we are so fortunate to have John Fernández from MIT and Amy Bowman from Carlow University. And today, we're going to talk about not just a just and merciful world, but a just and a sustainable world. So I'm really thrilled that the two of you have agreed to come and share with us today. Thank you for being with us.
Well, happy to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great. So let's begin with last night. We had a really insightful, thoughtful conversation about sustainability, and we talked about it from different aspects, from technology to art, to what we typically think about as sustainability. And John, you talked a little bit about water, but I think let's start out by just covering some of the basics. What are we talking about when we say sustainability? Let's start there from your perspective, and then let's move from what are we talking about to potentially what happens if we do nothing?
Okay.
John, you want to start?
Okay, yeah, sure. So when I talk about sustainability, I tend to start off with the basic definition. And, that's in light of the fact that a lot of people say sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And actually, no, it doesn't. It means some very particular things. And the definition that I use comes from the Brundtland Report, which came out of a workshop in 1987 and is really sustainable development. And the definition is the ability for us to meet the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And embedded within that definition is everything about what humans do, not just technology and not just physical things. It's what kind of world do we want for ourselves, and what kind of world do we want to allow to happen for future generations. And obviously future generations are just going to decide what kind of world they want, so it's up to them. So that's where I begin with sustainability.
That's great. What's it mean to you, Amy?
Well, that's a hard act to follow. And I also just want to say, because I was not on stage last night, but you two were, and you did an amazing job. And it was such an edifying, exciting, and really a generous conversation. I was just thinking,
thank you.
John, about how you are so generous and shared the discussion from so many different perspectives and with so many different people. And we had amazing community members, students. It just was a really special night. So I just want to thank you both for that opportunity. But when I think of sustainability, I think about it as interdisciplinary and across all facets of society. I also think about it in terms of what John is discussing, which I think that specific definition is so important in the sense that we are looking both ahead to the people that are coming after us, but also to the people that have come before us. And for me, that's a very, or not for me, but it is a very indigenous way of approaching existence and understanding our place in existence. So this idea that it's not just about us, that we are not autonomous individuals, but we are porous. We have, we eat food that comes from the earth. We interact with things. We all have skin in the game. And I think those things are in tension with the larger systems that shape our world today, which are essentially capitalism specifically. And another thread that I pulled out that was striking to me last night were these intersections between ableism and capitalism and competition in relationship to care, and how it is those tensions that really prevent us moving forward in a really sustainable way.
Before I get back to that second part of the question I asked you, and that is what happens if we do nothing? Well, let me further help us define how did we get here, right? How did this become the issue? What happened? When I was a child, nobody was talking about sustainability, right?
Yeah. So a couple things happened. One is that we have been extraordinarily successful, not only in extracting all those things that we need, like you're referencing, from the lithosphere, from the oceans, from the biosphere. We've been extremely successful. We've been too successful because with unfortunately, one attribute that humans have is that we don't necessarily coordinate between us, and so the commons, the earth, which is everyone's commons, we all have skin in this game, essentially, means that we all have access to oceans and fish, and clean air, water, everything else, but we unfortunately don't coordinate. So there's this concept of the tragedy of the commons, where the prototypical situation is you'll have a group of families around a pasture, and they have livestock, and they'll just have their livestock graze on that pasture, but they never coordinate on how much who has more or less access, and they degrade the pasture. And that's just a small analogy that you can scale as to the planetary scale. And through technology and capitalism, we've been able to build machines that are extraordinarily efficient at extracting and fulfilling our every want and desire. And so that's how we got here. One of the other reasons just one other part of that answer is that we got here. In other words, we know we know we are here. That's part of the fact we got here, because we know more about the Earth and about our effect on Earth systems than we ever have. So, as you say, when you were growing up, maybe sustainability wasn't a topic. We were doing the former that I described. We hadn't quite gotten to the latter to really understand what the effect was on the environment. And now we have.
Right. So that's landed us in this space, in this place. Last night, John, you said, or I think you said, giving myself a little room.
Of course.
That sustainability is not simply about, it's not simply about not using, but in some places like Africa, there needs to be more use.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that?
Sure.
Just a little bit more, because I think that's not something we think about is use. With sustainability. Yeah,
so consumption is extremely important in thinking about sustainability, because the level of consumption for many people, as I said last night, around the world is not acceptable. It's not fulfilling their, going back to the definition, it's not fulfilling their basic needs. So, for example, for food, let's talk about food a little bit. There's between now and 2050, there'll be an increase in the global population of 20%. We're adding 1/5 more people to the planet than exists today. To be able to feed those people, business as usual, we'd have to add 600 mega hectares, 600 million hectares to agricultural land. That's going to come out of something. It's going to come out of tropical forests. It's going to come out of fragile ecosystems. And the challenge for us is not just to feed people, it's to do it in a way that's sustainable. But it has to be equitable, because the only way that sustainability is going to be robust is if people are meeting their needs. If I have a child and the child's going without a meal, without eating, they're not getting enough calories, I could care less about sustainability. I'm going to do everything in my power to feed that child. And I think we have to take that perspective first. That's really the first thing that we need to think about. So the development side of sustainable development is really one of the most important things. I mean, you could talk about, last night I mentioned electricity. 600 million Africans don't have reliable access. And you could go on and on, healthcare and education and everything else. I think coupling development to sustainability means that you're building in to a sustainable world, economic viability, incentives for people to create robust institutions, all that needs to come along with decarbonizing society. So it's really not about consuming less. It's about consuming in a different way, and consuming in a way that I don't want to go into distributing the wealth of our production, because that's another issue altogether. But it really is about being able to understand what people need and fulfilling those needs in the system that we have, and slowly shifting the system away from a singular capitalist model.
And the word that comes to my mind as you two are having this discussion is the notion of reciprocity. And I think that example of that you gave last night, John, that stuck with me as well, Dr. Humphrey, is that we're not looking at deprivation across the board, that in fact we're thinking about reciprocity and balance. And that's what ecosystems are. It's about balance and interconnectedness. And so there's larger questions at hand in terms of how, without saying like the redistribution of resources, but is there a way, like, how do we bring in sharing and just reciprocal relationality in a way that can benefit everyone? And so that's what, as you were talking about that's what came to mind, that concept.
So Amy, you talked a little bit about reciprocity and sharing. And ultimately, we talk about those concepts routinely with our students, right? We talk about mercy. And mercy, it's interesting how mercy ties and wraps around this conversation. John, we talk about mercy being the process or the willingness to walk into the chaos of others. And that's going to be required if we really are going to make dramatic change. We're going to have to be willing to walk into the chaos of others. Amy, talk a little bit about how do you do that in the classroom today, given, that concept in general. I think people who are listening to this would say, oh, that's nice. We want to tell people to share, right? But how do we make that stand up and walk? How do we make that really concrete in the lives of the young people? Not the young people, we have older students here as well, that we are still trying to move that concept through. How are you doing it?
Well, that is an amazing and multifaceted question, and I think there's many layers to it. For one, I just also want to point out that we are on an amazing campus that is super unique, where we have babies to our elders, the Sisters of Mercy, and everyone in between. And I know that is a big, in addition to the mission, attracted me to coming to Carlow and working in terms of just the diversity of the community here. So this idea of like sharing, like how do you get people to be like, yay, sharing? And we know that from the get-go, caregivers and parents and early educators, that is a big element of the education that young children get is, what does this mean to share and be in relationship with one another? And so in the classroom, and also and I do a lot of experiential learning types of education in terms of working with the students in the gallery and mentoring them in terms of how they interact with professional artists and how they interact with all different aspects of kind of the professional lives. And it goes from the most theoretical to the most practical. So the first thing that I do is I try to level set everyone at the beginning of a semester that there is a hierarchy, right? There is a power differential. And I think Aaron was talking about the power differential with community activists and the corporations. However, we are in a space of co-learning where we build our education and our learning community together. And so that's the first thing. So that way they're not seeing it as I'm the expert, I deliver the information, and they are there to absorb it and then put it back out, that they are in relationship with me and we are in relationship with one another. The other thing I do is talk a lot about collaboration and how collaboration is really important. Obviously, like yada yada, I'm yada yadaing because it's a thing that gets talked about a lot in terms of what you need when you go out into the workforce. But we have to always collaborate, and collaboration is a skill. And not everybody knows how to collaborate, and not everybody knows how to collaborate well. So I really try to bring collaboration, the fundamentals, as a skill development in. Then the content that I work in, which is visual art. I'm an art historian, I'm a curator, and am involved in the practice of working with contemporary artists, is getting them to connect the importance of art, the importance of the poetic and the symbolic with their lived experience. And going back to what you highlighted last night, this idea of the voice, like voice is so important, and how does art function in that space? And there's a whole other conversation we can talk about in terms of these relationships that I know, for instance, Erin, the artist that spoke last night, she's very conflicted about it, which is like, how much can art actually do? Even though she doesn't but she knows what it can do, but she wants it to be more in this activist space. And so there's always going to be this tension between action and the symbolic, right? The other thing in terms of getting people to share is also just, and thinking about sharing is like just sitting down with them and seeing what they need. I know, like, for instance, you brought up some examples of students. So we have some students who are mothers and who are having profound barriers being thrown up for them. And they are a different type of student with a different experience than, say, the 18-year-old that might also be having a lot of challenges but can roll out of bed in the dorms and walk to class, whereas transit, mobility, childcare infrastructure, all of these things are huge barriers. So that has proven right now to be a challenge in terms of balancing helping them and being a refuge for them and providing those wraparound services, but also showing them that what they're doing has a lot of value, that they aren't just like the put upon single mom that doesn't have, who doesn't, like what they're doing is so vital. Going back to this next generation, the first teachers are the people who raise you. And so thinking about this value around care, and that this ripple effect, that the way our small interactions with one another builds and builds and builds and builds. And then there's also these ideas around like incrementalism and big change. And I think that's for the younger students is where they have a lot of idealism and optimism. And but then I think like someone like Erin that kind of smacks up against some of the barriers and then realizing that change doesn't happen as quickly. And I was actually wondering if you could sort of talk about that, because you mentioned your students last night and how they fill you with hope. Mine also fill me with lots of hope, and they're very energizing.
Well, I mean, that's a great prompt, because I wanted to pick up on the one of the things that has really come across coming here to Carlow is that we're very, very socially attuned creatures. We're also very socially anxious. So we all have our communities, and we always think something about the other community that we're not a part of that is kind of off. It's not quite accurate. And the reality is, what I see is that the things that you're talking about, that you, Dr. Humphreys, and you, Amy, are talking about, taking an ethical stance, co-creating, co-designing, collaborating, understanding the priorities of a community, getting beyond the singular focus of the marketplace. All of these things are absolutely what is in the air at MIT, and I think a lot of other technical universities. There's a convergence, I think a really, really positive and unprecedented convergence between science and ethics. So it used to be in the 60s and 70s, and my father was an engineer, that engineers and scientists thought, this is not my thing. I don't do, that's someone else's problem. I just solve the performance function that I've been given for this device, right? And today that's really not the case for young engineers and scientists who also are thinking, well, yes, I'm fulfilling the performance functions for this thing, this airplane, this satellite, this water system, whatever. But I'm also thinking about, well, what's its long-term consequences in terms of the material intensity of it? If it scales up, is it going to create enormous other environmental problems? Is it going to lead to more employment or not? What are the social ramifications? And one of the things that I see that's really promising is an engineer and scientist will think in those terms, but they won't make the judgment on the ethics of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They will go to the expert. They'll go to somebody who actually understands the nuance of ethics, what is and justice, what is distributive justice versus other types of justice. They'll actually, because they have learned themselves that the greatest thing they can do with their physics friends and their chemistry friends or whatever is that to be respectful of their disciplinary depth, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason people silo, and I go to someone who really knows what they're talking about when I have a question. Same thing now. Didn't used to be this way. Same thing now with people who understand ethics, who understand the broader social context in which technologies are being proposed. Mm-hmm. And so therefore this idea of co-designing it's now that's really more business as usual. You'll find no one at MIT advocating, we're going to develop this technology and we're just going to drop it in and it's going to work. Mm-hmm. Because even the most sophisticated technologies, the best design, the most sophisticated science behind an engineered object sometimes fails in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we can share. COVID happened, and it was probably the first time I can ever recall where the world had to come together. Why could we get it done for COVID, and we're having such a difficult time taking care of this issue of sustainability throughout the world?
Well, I mean, I'll start. A couple of reasons. The rate of the phenomena were completely different. So, because climate change, environmental issues generally they accumulate over years, if not decades, if not a couple hundred years. It's just a lot harder for people to really perceive to begin with in their daily lives, and then to know how to act. So that's one. I was in Singapore coming back to the United States when COVID hit. I was somewhere else. I landed in Singapore and everybody was wearing masks. And at that point you're like, what's going on? I'm going to take some action myself. I'm going to get a mask, right? So that's a very, very different thing than, yesterday it was 0.05 degrees warmer than the day before globally, right? But it doesn't really matter to me, right?
But today there are states in this country that are concerned about water. Nobody ever thought we would be concerned about water.
Yeah.
But the reality is we now have that urgency. It's not just something that happens in a foreign country. Yeah. It has something that has crossed the waters and is now living with us. And I think that's a huge urgency. We don't feel it here in Pittsburgh, but when I go to Arizona or I go to California,
sure,
they're living that urgency, the same urgency that I think a lot of other countries are experiencing today with water. I'm very concerned about water.
Yeah.
Right?
But in a lot of regions where water has become scarce because of change in precipitation and not enough recharge to the aquifer, and too much fossil water withdrawals, it really doesn't become an issue until the day when you actually don't deliver the amount of water that people are expecting. So it's the slow moving disaster. So in the West United States, I think it's very clear everyone knew what was coming for decades because the numbers didn't add up year in, year out. So we knew, and so it's really more, again, kind of like the social dynamics of us as creatures kind of shifting blame and not really wanting to deal with it, and also being satisfied today. I've got what I need today, so what's the big deal? Just sort of prevents us from confronting things that are an issue in the future, even if they're not that far into the future.
Let's go to 2050. It's 2050. And we're moving at the same rate and speed as we've always moved. What do we look like?
Well, so I'm going to answer this by also kind of doubling back and addressing the previous question too. So I've got two, I guess, anecdotes regarding this relationship between like the acuteness of the pandemic and how there was an immediate like before and after aspect that impacted all of us. And there was a newness to it, right? Mm-hmm. Like this entire generation had not experienced some type of illness that could actually pose this great of a threat. Mm-hmm. So it was a novel thing versus, as John was saying, these kinds of like slow moving, like we're on geological time, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're on a different time. We're not on a human time. Mm-hmm. And I think that for the 2050 piece, it's understanding like we have to have paradigm shifts, right? Just profoundly. We have to rethink what we understand time to be and what urgency means. But I've got a couple experiences. Like for one, my family's from Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh. My family originally was in Hazelwood, which was they immigrated over from my mom's side from Italy and worked in the mills. There was a lot of health issues on that side of the family, but it's not until now that we're realizing, oh, those health issues were most likely caused by the proximity to that industry. I've also lived in the Gulf Coast area, in which there's like a different type of urgency. So I moved back up here to get away from the hurricanes and the heat. And because it's stressful, it is very stressful. And where we were at in Pensacola, they had these amazing clear aquifers, but there was a history of lumber processing treatment. So the land was really filled with these awful chemicals like creosote and all of that. And when Hurricane Ivan came in 2004, it poisoned essentially the aquifer. So the water quality in Pensacola is horrible. Air quality pretty good. And I recall my brother and I like competing over like which of our neighborhoods has the worst pollution. And that's absurd. Like we're like sitting there like, you know, having this like contest of who's in a more pronounced cancer zone. The other thing on the Gulf Coast, and so I really appreciated you bringing in those images of New Orleans post Hurricane Katrina. We were down there in 2009, so we were in New Orleans a lot and saw that where it was at that point. Which was pretty raw. But there's thinking about the West and thinking about things that are happening in Georgia and in Florida right now, where there's like controlling, it's all a construct. Like the water not being there is in large part because humans have tried to control the flow of water. You know, there are water battles. In the West, that's really pronounced in California. In the Southeast, you have Lake Lanier in Atlanta the water flows through the Apalachicola River into the Gulf of Mexico. It created this amazing, rich ecological haven in Apalachicola Bay, where like known for its oysters, and so there's a whole industry built up around it. As Atlanta grew, Georgia redirected a lot of that water to Atlanta because it basically feeds Atlanta and is their drinking water. That has then messed up the salination of the Apalachicola Bay, and so the oysters do not survive. And so there was a complete and immediate collapse of an industry there. And we're talking like oystermen who were barely making enough money to begin with, who there's a big drug addiction piece to the whole thing. The quality of life there is just awful. And it's this beautiful place. And it's because, and so they've been fighting over who owns the water. And we need to stop doing that. So just going to like the 2050 piece, like paradigm shifts, and literally we cannot have states fighting over the natural flow of water because it has these immense ripple effects. Like why is Atlanta, and this goes to these questions of equity. Is Atlanta more important than Apalachicola? Are the people who live in Atlanta more important than the people who live in Apalachicola? And if you look at it from a market lens, Atlanta is more valuable. So,
But I want you to think about this, Amy. You have little people in
do.
your life.
Yes.
And so, in 2050, they're 25 years old, let's say, right? Maybe 28, 29, right? What kind of world are they going to live in? That's like tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? What kind of world are they going to live in if we don't do anything?
A scary one. I'm very scared about that. I don't know, other than trying to do our part, getting solar panels, composting, talking to them about why this is important, having them think and understand the connection between, like, we live here, we enjoy going outside, not everybody gets to enjoy these things, we're all connected, we must, we don't smush the worm, we respect the worm, kind of a thing. But I am scared. The storms, the heat, the volatility, what they're going to have to be prepared for is unlike anything any of us know. And so I don't know how or if I'm preparing them well. And I think that's another question has to be at the center of the sustainability conversation, is kind of getting to your point, Dr. Humphrey, like things are going to be bad. We can, even if we're turning it around, it's not going to be the way it is today. What are we doing to prepare that next generation for the lived reality of all of that?
And I'm asking this question because I think, a lot of people, we talked about this last night, they don't buy it because they can't feel it, they can't see it, they can't touch it. And I'm asking this question to give us more texture to, no, really, this is what it's going to look like. We already know, the science is already telling us, we know more about the earth, right? And so this is not a guessing game. This is the reality and the truth. And I think we don't paint the picture enough. We often talk about how we're concerned about it, but I don't think we paint the picture enough to really help people to see this is what you're looking at. So one of the things that you're saying is children may not play outside anymore, right? And the truth of the matter is, even today, some children can't play outside anymore, right? Which is something dramatically different, but very concrete, very hard, very real. And so I'm just trying to paint that picture a little bit more so that it's very concrete, very real.
Yeah. So what I'd like to focus in on your question is, what's the reality? You want to know what the reality is, what's happening today, and what we can expect for the future. Well, so what's not as well known as the fact, and it is a fact that we've been moving very slowly, is that we recently are starting to move very fast. And that is, for example, climate financing, which is the amount of money that goes into investing in climate actions, all kinds. The private sector invests in renewable energy companies. The public sector invests in supporting communities for greater resilience to climate consequences. All those things are put into one bucket as climate financing. And 2 years ago, it was $600 million. Last year, it was $1.27 trillion. Business as usual means it's increasing. And if it increases at the rate that it has been increasing in the last 5 years, we're going to have plenty of climate financing to do the work that needs to be done. Yes, maybe a little slowly, but the trend line is extremely positive. Another example, photovoltaics now are competitive with every other fossil energy production system, stationary power plant, in most regions in the world. So there's a flood of investment money going into renewable energy and solar photovoltaics, but also wind turbines. If we continue to do as we're doing now, we're actually going to have an enormous amount of renewable energy. In 10 years, 15 years, we'll probably have what we need. Again, it's a little slow. We've already banked in the atmosphere a great deal of warming, and there's a huge debate about where we're going to end up. So let me now answer the question you wanted me to answer, which is what's it going to look like? So if we actually The trend line, it's a huge range between 2 and 4 degrees of warming in 2050, 2075, depends on how you. 2 to 4 degrees means, it doesn't seem like a lot, right? On a daily basis like today, 2 degrees more, no big deal. Think about what we've been going through where we've had 1.2 degrees C warming globally. You've seen 90-degree temperature in Greenland for many days. You've seen full summers, almost entire summers of above 90, 95 degrees, and soon above 100 degrees, a full summer in Texas and the southern states. Mm-hmm. That's 1.2 degrees. We're talking about 2 to 4. So you'll see most of the year in the southern states at 90 degrees and 4 or 5 months above 100 degrees. You'll see the complete loss of Arctic sea ice. You'll have situations where because of the effects of the atmosphere, you'll have much greater particulate pollution in cities, and like you say, people won't go outside because of that. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think, again, answering your question to say, well, if we really don't do anything and we're not on the path we're on, what's the worst case scenario? I actually think the trend lines in the last few years tells me that we are moving in the right direction, and we will have less than the worst case scenario.
Our hope is that that we're going to send a different message to this next generation. One of my favorite quotes is that children are a message we send to a world that we will not see. And the work that we all do, because we have made the decision to work with the leaders of the next generation, with the leaders of the next world, is that we're going to send a message. And our work to create a more just and merciful world begins with us and our commitment to this work, to walking into the chaos of it, to ensuring that our students understand the importance of their voice in justice and how that justice is not only affecting their everyday life, but the entire world. So I want to thank both of you for being in this conversation with us today. And I hope that somebody who hears it gains another perspective. But most of all, I hope that they gain a desire to create a more just and merciful world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.